Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Talk Gnosis, and welcome back, William Charnock. Hi, William.
Hello.
William is a creative. I think that'd be I don't know what you self-describe yourself as. And you've been working on a very interesting, in some ways, many ways, always, multidimensionally ways, groundbreaking project on Gnosticism on the Aeon. So we had you on before to talk about, I believe, both the Knockwood cards and the Aeon cards. I'll link that show up in our show notes. But William, the great thing is, I could ask you the exact same questions from last time. And because it's been a couple of years, I know that I would get full, rich, different, in some ways, answers because of the way that you engage with this material, of the insights that are always flowing. That's one of the wonderful things about Gnosticism. My first question is, you've spent a lot of time with some of the Gnostic texts, like the Book of Secret John or Thunder Perfect Mind. I find, particularly with Secret John, almost every time I read it, I see something new. There's a new spark. Something else turns on. There's a new subtlety in the text that I've never noticed before. I'm wondering if you have similar experiences when you engage with this material.
Yeah, I find the texts, and I don't go back to them as much now as I used to. When I first created the cards, I was reading them all the time, and I was jumping between different ones. I was I think I told you this story that I serendipitously bumped into Elaine Pagel, and she became a really good friend. And she helped direct me because there were so many different texts that describe the Aeons in different ways. And she was the one who said, start with Valentinus and work out from there, because there is a structure, there's a sort of shape to the work that he did. And so I did. That's exactly what I did. I started with Valentinus as a sort of foundational piece. And then over the years, I've been looking at various different texts with various different Aeons articulated and sort of tried to work out in my head how they all fit. What are the patterns? What are the commonalities? Where are the differences? But when I've been looking at those things, I've come to the realization that the context really, really matters. That the context of when you read a piece, when you think about an Aeon, when you sort of study an Aeon, your current context really frames that concept and that idea. And then if you come at it from another context, then you sort of see a different aspect of that. And so I have really found that there's the richness of the Aeons has been infinite in many ways. You sort of see them through different lights and at different times, and they have such broad meaning that you can sort of extrapolate out to your moment, the moment that you're in. And I find them very helpful for that.
Yeah. Well, that leads quite well to my next question, which is, what is an Aeon? What do you understand of being an Aeon?
I should start out by saying I got attracted by the Aeons because I had already developed a framework for human behavior and psychology, which I was using. And I was trying to find a language for people to apply that framework to their own lives in a practice, in a ritual, in a behavior. Because so much of these texts were academic. They were sort of studied by people who really loved poring over the words, but it was really hard to think about how you define them for yourself and how you use them for yourself. And that's why in the end of this, I started creating this deck of cards that was sort of like a Gnostic tarot, but it's actually a deck of cards that takes Valentinus's 32 Aeons. I've added a couple of extras because there were some important ones left out. And I sort of then tried to articulate how we could use the Aeons. Now, in my mind, the Aeons, and again, I think of the texts as being very, very symbolic. They're from a storytelling time when language wasn't as important because not everybody could read and write, and metaphor and simile and narrative were used all the time. And so I tend to take the Aeons quite loosely. So for me, they are a description of a number of energies, forces, or resonances that in the creation of the universe are sort of fundamental building blocks that exist both within us and within everything else around us, within nature, within the universe. I think of them as more like resonances, energies that you can sort of learn about and direct. And I think for me, it's really important that they are part of us. They are the sort of 36 dimensions of what might be called a divine spark or an inner soul or self. But they are also, as within, so without, they are also in everything around us, and they're sort of fundamental building blocks of the universe. What I've found in my practice of using them and understanding them and applying them to my day-to-day life and existence is that they have so much power and force because they actually describe some fundamental principles about the relationships. They're relational in many ways, about the relationships between different things and different energies. And without going too deep, the fact that they come in syzygies is actually equally important, because what you've got are these pairs of things that are joined together, so they are connected ideas. But they are each quite independent in their own right. But when you bring them together and you understand the relationship to them and how they cannot be separated, then you find more depth and meaning within that. So back to your question, I think for me, Aeons, because in all of these texts, they describe the emanation. They start from a particular place and then they sort of get deeper and deeper and deeper. What I've also understood is that there's actually dimensions of them that are on 3 levels. There are some of them that have quite material and practical and tangible meaning. There are some that I feel like nous and anthropos. They are very sort of almost like psychological, like the self and the mind. And so there's that psychological layer. And then obviously a number of them are much more spiritual. They are actually they're metaphors for things that are really hard to explain. They're great language for things that perhaps we don't understand fully, or forces and energies that we can't put down to, oh, that's just psychology or that's just physics. It's the other energies in the universe that and again, they're magical. They're sort of mysterious energies. And so also understanding that relationship between the material, the psychological, and the spiritual, the metaphysical, is also important in all of them, because each Aeon has relevance on those different levels.
Right. So you're not just taking the Aeons and saying, this is just a symbol, right? We're going to take this Aeonic process, this story. It actually, it's just an encoded way of talking about psychology. So on one hand, William, that's actually true, right? But on the other hand, these things are working on these layers, as you said, at least 3 layers. 3 layers that you're able to discover and notice and apply. Because again, with these cards, with your thought, you were talking about the scholarship, right?
Yeah.
The Gnosticism is in some ways very popular, but in other ways, the materials are very scholarly, right?
Yeah.
Which is, yes. And that's one of the many reasons we wanted to have you on, as we're trying to, engage not just in this scholarly vein, right?
But I think you've got to go back to the time when it wasn't scholarly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem. Like, these texts would have been lost for so long that the first people, like, this is what Elaine described to me, is like the first people to take the text. When the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered, she was at Princeton, and all of the canonized texts were poured over by the professors and the all the men who ran the theology at the university. And there were these other texts left at the side. And she described it to me as like dumpster diving. These were all the things that were left on the side. She was female, and therefore she took Book of Mary Magdalene, she took Thomas, she took those things and worked on those because that's what she had available to us. And what the problem with that is that meant that the first interpretations of these things were scholarly, but in fact, these texts were never meant to be scholarly. They were not meant to be studied. And if you look at things like the Book of Jude or some of those other texts, they're actually practices. And even the lists of sayings from Jesus, those are all there for people to use and practice. And so for me, that was the biggest difficulty, was stepping away from the intellectual and the academic and actually stepping into, well, what does this mean on a human personal level? So when you see these metaphors, when you hear these narratives and stories that everybody's poured over in great detail and applied meaning to, it's very easy to think that they're only applied to academic and intellectual pursuits. But actually, these were originally the tools of the practice, not necessarily academic texts. And so I think, and again, you're talking to people who didn't read or write and just told stories. And so you've got to pull the symbolism out and pull the metaphors out and try and extrapolate into, well, what does this mean? And again, I'm thinking of a fantastic syzygy, which is anthropos and ecclesia. You've got this, and you sort of wonder, how would that have been experienced by someone who was a religious practitioner in the first century? And it really is, anthropos is that self, that the body that you inhabit. It's my life, it's my lifestyle, it's my word, it's logos, it is, and zo, who are, it's my word, which is more like the sense of giving your word. It's the things you commit to, the things you agree to do, as well as your life, which is your behaviors, your practices, your decisions, and your choices. So you start to think, okay, right, that's myself. That's my lifestyle, my habits, my behaviors, my convictions to people, my honesty, my truth. And then paired with that, you've got ecclesia, which is the vessel of community and gathering and people together. And so you sort of have to understand, right? Okay, you've got your inner self and your outer self. There's a self that is how you live and how you behave, but then there's that sense of your role within a bigger group, and how do you participate in that bigger group in other ways. Now, when you get into the academia of ecclesia and anthropos, it gets really, really deep, but it's sort of really interesting. It's like you have two ways of existing. One is as yourself, and one is in a community and as a gathering and as a participant in a group. And those are two important dimensions and energies that you've got to sort of alternate between.
I'm going to pop in here, and I know I ambushed the conversation, but I feel like I'm already really engaged with it. I wanted to kind of, as John's pointed out, we often on this show are really interested in the interplay between how much we can know about these texts from a historical or an academic and a translating method, but also in an integrative practitioner, lived experience way. And I think you're really drawing that out. One of the things that I find my method of application is a different form of academia, which is literary studies, or art studies, like aesthetic, the literary theory or art theory, in which it only matters if you can relate it to the experience of the work in question. And someone can have their interpretation of a particular text or what have you, but it's only like applicable if you can communicate that impact in a way that makes sense to other people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like I see that as very connected to the process of like, if I'm going to find a spiritual metaphor, it's not, the onus isn't on someone else to accept it. I need to find a way to communicate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting since I last spoke to you. So I created the cards. And we were sort of in COVID, so it was like I'd created the cards. I'd published the book. I'd created these things, but I never really launched it because we were deep in the middle of COVID. And so I spent the first year or so using it and applying it to lots of people. Since then, what I've found myself doing much more often, I mean, now the book is available in different stores here, and I don't have national distribution, but it's available online, and then it's in a couple of stores here. And I go in quite often and I do readings with people who know nothing about Gnosis and Gnosticism or the academia. But what I do with these readings is really interesting, because when you apply these things, and I almost do nothing except explain some of the concepts of each card as it reveals itself, and ask them to apply that to themselves and think of what they're talking about from the perspective of this energy or this resonance that is happening. And it is amazing how resonant those things are when you apply them, and how the human mind sort of takes the topic you're talking about, takes the card that you've told them some meaning, and it's actually in a position of a spread which says like this is like inner or outer, or this is where you are now or where you're going. And it becomes very, very meaningful to people. So in the last 5 years of sort of applying these concepts to people's lives that are totally not into the academia, but into their own problem, and asking them to look at it from that perspective. It is amazing to me how much that resonates and how valuable those perspectives are. And so it starts to frame the meaning of the Aeon. I mean, my interpretations have got deeper and deeper and richer, but they've become more practical. They've become much more applied rather than theoretical, because I've seen like 100 people interpret that card to their life, and that's how I start to understand some of the non-academic meaning of these things. It's not it's not the interpretation or the word. It's actually, how does this get applied into people's lives? And I do a little exercise with a lot of people who have the cards, which is just one card a day to exercise your understanding of that resonance. Apply that energy to your problems, your challenges, your opportunities of the day, and learn what that brings to the equation. Learn what doors it opens, learn what doors it closes. And that's really helped me understand the Aeons, not just as sort of these theological constructs, but they're actually really useful tools. They're really useful and valuable. I don't know if they're tools or whether they're just perspectives.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you talk so much about how they're useful and practical, and it's not theoretical. Because, Jason, I think you're going to agree with me here. I think one of the points of this show is that Gnosticism is important, relevant to the modern world, and it's not just theoretical. And finally, there's a variety of ways to engage with it and to bring it into your life. You don't, and why I'm talking about that is, my bag is partly modern liturgical Gnosticism, right? So the churchier Gnosticism. I know in a post-secular, post-Christian world that is not going to be everybody's path. It's barely Jason's path, right, Jason? So
Yes,
yeah,
very true. I am the non-churchy one, as I often say on the show.
yeah, but Jason is engaging with Gnosticism through art and theater, literary criticism, as he was saying, and now we have the Aeon cards, right? So I was wondering a two-part question, William. What do you think about this idea of a variety of ways to engage with Gnosticism? And two, does Gnosticism matter in the modern world? Is it particularly suited to the modern world? Should we be bringing it back? Should we have the great Gnostic revival?
That's a big question.
Well, can I start on the second half? Because that's the bit that sort of jumps to mind very quickly, because people ask me this quite a lot, because I'm talking to people about a practice of aeonology, not just the aeons. And Valentina's had this idea that you had to really study and understand the aeons. And I have applied that in a day-to-day practice. Should we bring it back, and what's its value? For me, I've sort of come to the conclusion that the real value, and I think this is true of a lot of the Nag Hammadi texts, is that they've been lost, hidden, uncorrupted. They come from a sort of purity of form, and they've suddenly been they're sort of revealed in 1946 or whenever, but then a few years to being translated, probably 70s and 80s. So really, it's very, very recent that these 1,000-year-old texts have been uncovered. And what's different between the texts that were buried and the texts that are here now is and I'm a bit unfair in this, the corruption of established religions and established organizational structures that loses some of the freshness of that early period of Christianity and has sort of applied power and motive and politics and all the other things that come in. And so its real value for me is that it's got a purity from an earlier time, and it's triggering lots of things that have been suppressed by institutional or political influence. And so for me, that's one of the greatest values, that first of all, you're going back to a time in Christianity when it had yet to be institutionalized. Secondly, I think you're going back to a time in Christianity when it was more clear and apparent that it was pulling from all sorts of other cultural interests around. It wasn't creating that them and us between other religions. It was actually adopting from Thunder Perfect Mind, for example, is Elaine Pagel says she believes it's a prayer to Isis, but it had value, so it got used. There's a lot of concepts and ideas, like I was just writing about fish symbolism that comes from Hindu and Indian religions, and so there was a much less fear about them and us back in those days, and it was adopting the things that were valuable and useful and that people could use. And so I feel like that's the value that these texts have, is that they come from a time where it was a little bit more open in terms of people adopting and embracing things, but it also comes from a time that was pre the corruptions and politics and power plays of institutional religion. So for me, that's the value. That's why it's worth coming back to these ideas. The other thing, I think, if you study anything about psychology, human consciousness, and any of those things, I also think our understanding of consciousness has evolved quite significantly. I think even things like quantum physics and other things give us all sorts of questions of what is reality and how important is consciousness and mind in framing what we think is our reality. And I think there is a lot of elements within that early Gnostic thought that hints to that there is not, that it's a constructed reality. It's one that is very easy to fall into and to go along with, but there is a deeper thing that you have to pursue. And whether that's Jung's shadow and and finding the darkness and getting out of the light, or whether it's pursuing areas of self that you've never explored or that your ego is suppressing. I think there's something really important about getting to those fundamental ideas that I think are now becoming more understood. I mean, I think there are early interpretations of some of the anomalies and things that we didn't know how to explain that now would be quantum physics or consciousness studies are beginning to identify, there's a bit here that we don't know about. We sort of tended to suppress them in the past. And now I think it's, at least for me, I'm feeling that it's this whole idea that there is something deeper. Our consciousness is a fake reality, almost demiurgic, false god. Our ego is a false god that has created this world that pretends to be that perfect place, but in fact it's not.
So you mentioned the falseness of reality, the demiurge, some of this mythology, these metaphors that we find within the Gnostic texts.
Yeah.
I'm quite fond of talking about them as metaphors. I do think that they have some kind of ontological reality. They may not be beings, but there's something going on. I'm wondering if you can tell us your understanding of those. And, you wrote about the demiurge in one of your posts, right? Demiurge as reaction is my notes. It's such an awesome idea. Could you talk to us about all that?
Yeah, and I think some of this comes, and look, obviously Jung was greatly influenced by the texts he had available. God only knows what would have happened if he'd had all of the texts available. But you can so clearly see the similarities between what he articulated in terms of, in his day, psychology was the thing, the new thing that brought dimension and richness to people's understandings of themselves. And so I do apply quite often, and I've been working on a book that really looks at Jungian psychology and the Aeons and the parallels between those two. And really applying some of this psychoanalysis perspective. I'm sort of halfway through it, and I sort of realize how influenced by the day that he was writing, that he really applies it only to psychology. And I actually think it's deeper and more important than that. But to your question, the thing I find most interesting is the parallels between Jung's individuation process, where he believed there was a process of wholeness that was created from both the conscious and the subconscious. And the more you became aware of the subconscious, then the more fuller you became, the closer to your true nature, in his language, you were getting. And it was this journey to wholeness. Now, that is exactly the same narrative and story that is in these ancient texts, where the pleroma is the fullness, and the relationship between mind and truth. Like, that's one of the first syzygies in the cosmology, where mind is everything. Now, nous is everything you know, everything creative, everything sensory, feeling, consciousness, really. And it is paired with aletheia, which is truth. And And again, in my practice, it's become very clear to me that that's just everything that is within and everything that is without. And the more you discover new things, aletheia literally means that which will be revealed in its ancient Greek. It's truth, but it means all truths, both known and unknown.
Oh.
And so there are truths that we know, which is part of mind, but there are also a whole load of truths that we don't know. So it that exploration and discovery to uncover new truths that is just as important as dwelling on the truths that you already understand and know. And that, for me, is very similar to Jung and his idea of unconscious and understanding your unconscious and your shadow self to get a fuller, wholer sense of your own psychology. But it's also the truth about the demiurge. The demiurge was a false god, was not pure and perfect, was imperfect. And that's why the demiurge's creation is insufficient. There's more to it. And so again, the parallels there are the same. It's like you cannot stop at the known and understood or even the asserted and the claimed. There is always a deeper place to go and uncover. And with everything you uncover, you discover an infinite number of new things that take you down different paths. So it's that. And again, I apply it inner and outer. So there's an inner discovery process, but equally there's an outer discovery process, like going out in the world, finding the things that are interesting and not focusing on the things that you already know and understand. and by investigating and pulling apart and finding new things that are interesting, you get a fuller, richer experience.
I'm just trying to find a way to wrap my head around the thought that it's not just a matter of taking any abstract concept generally, but also these abstract concepts specifically, and holding them in stasis, but rather integrating them, involving them, manipulating them, and because the process of working with them is part of the process, if that makes sense.
I think so. And again, it's an interesting thing because I've been more in the practice than the philosophy, the study of these things. There is nothing static about them in my mind. They are not static in it. It's why I talk about them as sort of resonances more than anything. They're resonances that push you forward. They're resonances that force you to, with the ups and downs, you sort of see new things. It's funny, when I read the cards, I have an interpretation of the cards, which is when it's in reverse. And a lot of people tend to think that when you read the cards and the card is upside down, they get really upset. They think it's a bad thing. But it's not. It's actually, it's the absence of the thing. So, for example, akinatos, which is sort of strength and solidity, when it's reversed, it means the opposite, which is, it's not bad. It's actually just, and I was doing a reading the other day and it was like, yeah, well, you don't have to go in so confident and positive and assertive. Start not being strong. Try moving forward without your normal sort of assertive strength. Be receptive. Be inert. Be almost fluid. And it's sort of interesting. So I think there's also this relationship between them. There's the energy itself of the Aeon, but there's also the absence of the Aeon. So if you don't have community or ecclesia, if you don't have agape, what is, or love, is that a bad thing or is it a good thing? Sometimes it's a good thing. Agape takes a lot of energy away from you, like motherhood, which is the sympathy of agape. So mother is very devoted to that love and that nurturing, but sometimes take love away. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes it allows other things to evolve and emerge. And so for me, that's some of the relationships of these things. They're not static, but they're actually dynamic. They relate to each other, and you can have the absence of them, and that's not a bad thing. Sometimes that's a good thing.
Well, like yes to all of that, and that these ideas engage in the process of reading them, like of having having them on cards, working with them not as a textbook of here are the list of aeons, and
Yeah.
I need to integrate all of them all the time. Do you know what I mean? But rather, what's going on with me today? What in which way are the winds blowing?
Yeah, and which way are the winds blowing? And also, because they're inner and outer, you can sort of say which powers within myself am I going to lead into, as well as succumbing to them. So they are energies. For me, they're the dimensions of the inner energies and spirit that you maybe can't articulate and say this is my personality or this is my thing, but there's a dimension of myself that is immovable and stoic and static, and there's a dimension of myself that's fluid. It's divine feminine, divine masculine. It's how do I and actually just the practice of today the card was upside down. What if I apply more divine feminine or divine masculine? What happens when I do this? It's a workout for some of the different approaches that you might have to what you're dealing with. And I think that's where this idea of exploring the things that they're not the habits and the behaviors that you always go to, thinking about this full spectrum of stuff forces you to reflect from different perspectives that you might not naturally go to. And again, I think that relates to the randomness of a card reading model, because it allows you to actually apply that sort of serendipity and that
that personal engagement. Like you have to,
and the stimuli is you take the stimuli and you run with it. It's like improvisation. You
yes, exactly.
And you run with it, and good things come. Whereas when you block it, it doesn't. It closes down. So again, I find you sort of, again, as I come to pistis and faith, it's like sometimes you just have to have faith that this is going to play out. And so sometimes if you experiment with that dynamic of just believing good things will come, how does your day change? And it's not that the day is any different, but it's giving you an awareness of these dimensions of inner self, but also dimensions of behavior and dimensions of interaction. It's fascinating how it plays out. And it's not just psychological. There are spiritual too. I mean, because of the nature of the Aeons, it's allowing you to have a belief in things that actually are very hard to articulate what they are, or why you should follow them, or why you should listen. Love being a good example of agape. But there are hundreds of, there are many of them in here. Like Bythos, I always find fascinating because, like, it's depth. It's going in deep, immersive, but also sometimes a sort of nothing.
William, can you do a reading for the coming year for the show?
Okay, let's see how this goes. I've not done it for a show before, so we'll see. Okay, so this is interesting. This is one of the Aeons that is not technically one of Valentinus's, but I was reading the Book of Zhu, and Io, U, which is justice. So this is the card of justice and balance. So what I would say in this reading, if this is about the show, is that there is something going on that you're tossing up between two things. There's like either an offer that's available or some opportunity, and there's a debate or a discussion, or you're weighing the merits of a couple of different dimensions. And I can talk a little bit about the symbolism on the card. The outer symbol, the pentagon, represents sort of complexity and materials, lots of material things being in play. So it's sort of all these different dimensions. And the square, it represents the sort of social or collective. So you're balancing needs of interest other people, or you're balancing needs of different people. It's not inner, it's sort of outer in that community sense. So is there anything going on that's sort of...
I would say so. Yeah. We've been working internally on a lot of things where we've alongside, like, I don't think we're going to stop doing the kind of shows like we're doing right now, which are often interviews or conversations, but we also are looking at more like directed projects where we're like going to maybe look at a specific subject and present and discuss that, if that makes sense. So I would say, and that is definitely community minded. Like, it feels like it's a thing that the community of general Gnostic media and participants and practitioners seem like it might be a ripe time for it, and a space for this, for our particular voice, is kind of necessary and important at the moment. I don't know, John, let me know if I'm going off too far here.
I think that's exactly right. And for folks at home, we've talked about this in our Mapping Gnosticism episodes, so you don't have to worry about the show going away, or if you like the interviews, but we do talking about a balance card, right? Balance it off a little bit more, a little less focus on the interviews, because people can go out and find that material. And Jason and I aren't going to pretend to be any kind of prophets who are revealing stuff on Gnosticism, right? We want to put together some well-researched shows about really important topics and both give our perspectives, but through discussion, right?
Yeah.
This is a way to discover new things, to unearth things. So I think that's where we're trying to go. And talking about balance, right? William, we are trying to balance those two approaches, the two ways of doing the show. To balance the needs of our community, some of the material aspects out there of running a podcast. Does that sound right to you, Jason?
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
And again, I think this is where this dynamic of the square, the social, the community piece is, it's balancing, again, possibly from a listener's perspective or an audience perspective. And again, this is the topic we're going to be talking about. This is the topic is, for that audience, what are the balances and what are the things, and how do you navigate your way around that? And so this is very much, that's the nature of that card, which is, okay, you've got some choices to make. You've got some opportunities and some things that are working, but things you want to try and do some additional work. Okay. So then when I do a reading, the second card focuses on the inner. So what is it you should look to yourself for? And this is interesting. This is one of the sort of, what I would say, the ace cards. It's all of the other cards have two symbols. Some of the primary Aeons have just one, because and so this is one of those primary syzygies, the Nous and Aletheia. This is Aletheia. This is truth. This is the card of pushing forward. And I talked about this earlier, actually, ironically. Truth being that which will be revealed. So this is looking to yourself to really push forward, but also push to things that maybe you don't currently understand. Push into places which will uncover new dynamics. This is saying, look for revelation, not reinforcement. This is saying, look for areas where what you think you know may not be true, and don't stick with the things that you know work. This is saying look to yourself for uncovering the things that like the new truths, what could be true, what new truth could be true. Don't just go with what you know, or what, and this could also be what other people do. It might be a little bit of saying don't stick with sort of tradition formats or structures. This is saying there's a new truth or there's a new opportunity out there, and you should look to yourself to uncover that and find perhaps a greater potential or a bigger opportunity, or even just something new and fresh and interesting. But that's this is saying use the Aeon of there's a new truth out there. There's an energy and a resonance in the world that says somebody's going to have to discover something new, something fresh, something interesting, something that's going to open people's minds, make them think differently about it. And this is saying, look for that. Start looking for things where you think there's, again, not necessarily following tried and trusted things, actually go out on a limb a little bit. And I mean, also, Aletheia is paired with nous and mind in the syzygy. So it's also sort of saying that don't stick with, like, you've got to get beyond your own heads and your own thinking and go into that new space. And again, to the demiurge conversation we were having, sometimes your ego or sometimes your ideas of what you think are true will hold you back from seeing other truths that are possible.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I got to say that's great advice, regardless of where it came from. With the show. So, what do you think, Jason? Any feedback on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, like there's, I don't want to shift this entirely into all the ideas we've been working on behind the scenes, because that'll come out soon. But what I like about this is that this both feels validating, because I feel like we are trying to explore something new that is pushing against, I think, traditional or at least common discussions around Gnosticism. But I'm also taking this as a bit of a check that I don't get too high on my own supply, that I don't get too pleased with my own conclusions, and that I make sure that they're tested. You know,
and so just to keep on the original framework that I had used exactly the same symbols. So this symbol, the forward-facing arrow, which in the Aeonology is truth, was all about adventure and exploration. A fundamental sort of human motivation. And so this is the outer versus the inner. This is a push out into new territory. I don't know if you can see on here that it doesn't come across here. Those drawings in the background came from my scribbling and writings, but that's two circles that unite. One says known and one is unknown, and the point of the triangle is sort of in the overlap between the known and the unknown. And I think that's so true of truth. It's like, yeah, there's truth you know and truth you don't even know you don't know, right? And so it's a balance of sticking with what's known, but also making sure there's space for the unknown and the stuff you didn't even know was possible.
I mean, again, I don't want to lean too far on this, but like part of the whole reason we're calling it mapping Gnosticism is that I think that it's so much more interesting to think of this stuff as a journey towards a mystery versus a new like a new perfect map that outlines all of the perfect steps. It's like that it's an exploration, and the map is not the territory. So I think yes to all of this. This is great.
This is you talk about the journey. I wrote a Substack about the journey. I think one of the differences between the academic study of the Aeons and some of the practice that I've had, when you read particularly things like the Book of Jude and Pistis of Fear, the description of the Aeonology and the emanations always start from God or monad and come out.
Hmm.
When I was reading some of those early texts, it suddenly struck me that if you think about the ancient tabernacle, the inner sanctum was the sort of closest part to God, but everybody started from outside. So I started looking at the Aeons, not from the way that academics tend to study them, which is mind and truth starts, and then you work your way down, but actually starting from the opposite end, where actually Sophia and Thelitas. So Sophia is wisdom, but also Thelitas, which is perfection, who are in a syzygy. If you look at, and again, I wrote a whole post about this as a journey and a path, but it starts at the bottom where what you know, the wisdom you have, but also the imperfection of you as a human being, that you've got to accept your imperfection and you can't take your wisdom as absolute. There's actually always more wisdom further to go, somewhere you can move on. And so that tension between Thelitas and Sophia, for me, was that starting point on a journey to greater insight and revelation, is that you've got to accept that you don't know everything. And there are truths, and move beyond your known truths into unknown truths. But you've got to value your gnosis, your knowledge. But it wasn't absolute knowledge. It was imperfect knowledge. And so the story of Sophia, where she leaves her partner, it's never explicitly said, but she left her partner in perfection, which is why the material world, perfection, but that's why the material world was imperfect, because it was Sophia acting on her own to create man. And so anyway, understanding that relationship between Sophia wisdom and perfection, or the absence of perfection, for me is the journey. And you can actually look at the journey of at least Valentinus's Aeonology as almost like paths into the tabernacle, into the inner circle, into the inner crypt, in the inner sanctum. And really the last point is the revelation that your mind is different from truth, and your mind cannot never know everything. And there will always be more. The infinite inner and the infinite outer. There will always be more to understand and know, and that is where you will find spirituality, God, whatever you want to call it. So again, sorry to go off on a tangent, but I think there is a journey here. And if you read, certainly a number of the texts articulate it as a journey, but I think the interpretation's always been from the emanation down versus from the other way up. It's a ladder.
Yeah.
So anyway, again, as I've practiced this, those are some of the things that have come across. Let me carry on. The third card I do, again, this is where, again, always the inner outer, what is within, without. So the third card, the outer is how you should proceed, how you should move forward, like your actions, your motivations, your aspirations. And this, I don't know if you can see this card, is Metrikos, the mother. So this is moving forward with, and again, reading it in relation to this, is giving birth to something new. Mother, obviously, Divine Mother is all about putting something new into the world, nurturing it, helping it, developing it. And so this is saying move forward with a mother's care and attention and nurturing. It will not be fully formed when it first comes out. It will be fragile. It will be it will have potential to grow, but it's not in its finished form. So there's a degree of protection you will have to do. There's a degree of helping and nurturing as it sort of moves forward. And and again, this is saying apply that maternal energy, that how things get brought into the world is not in their finished form, in full strength and full, like, do not expect your offspring will be suddenly the most successful thing. It's a seed. It's a thing that needs care and attention. It will need to evolve. It will need to develop. It will it will learn. It will grow. It will have life, and it might take on a life of its own. I mean, that's the other thing about children and motherhood is the dimension of letting it have its own life and not controlling it, and not, like, it's not parental, it's not paternal, patrikos, which is father, protection, defending, making safe. This is motherhood. This is nurturing, seeing the good within it, allowing it to be its own self, allowing it to grow, allowing it to learn and evolve and have its own identity, its own self. So this third card is moved forward with that. And again, the shield or the lens is the protection, but it's of another. So the square is of this thing. This thing is separate from you. You're giving birth to here is going to have a life of its own. But you are its mother. You've given birth to it. So there is a responsibility there for you to. And again, it's interesting. There's Metrikos and Patrikos. Sometimes the father card comes up. And that's a very different energy. And actually, they're not syzygied together. Metrikos is syzygied with agape, which is love.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, all of this lines up perfectly for I know what I'm interested in, because I think I'm also not interested in the stuff that we're making to become a new dogma or a new one way to do Gnosticism. So the idea of like creating something that we are inherently thinking about, that is going to grow, that it's going to progress beyond us, that like, you know, that it's all of this feels really well connected so far.
Yeah. Okay, so the final card, and again, you'll see here the mix that I go to, which is the final card is the ultimate outcome, what will be. So again, in the spread, you've got where you are now, what is this thing, which is you're tossing up these things, what you inner, outer. And so this is what will be. This is, so you've got where you are now to what you will be. And this is Aeons, this is praise. This is high esteem. So the ultimate outcome here is something, a prediction that will become true. It will have recognition and praise. It is high esteem. So it's saying that there is a value here, but not just to you, but to other people. That's not necessarily fame and fortune.
But it could be fame and fortune.
It could be. I'm not saying it's not. I mean, you see this, the note here is that, I don't know if you can see on the cards. Again, these came from my, I created the cards in a week in a very deep and intense creative session. And I scribbled notes, and then I used some of them. So this is the treasure that is forward. It's related to this one. Find that new truth, find that future. But here, this has got the social dynamic within it. So this will be meaningful and interesting to people. It will be praised. It will be recognized. It will be valued. Like the treasure piece of this. And there's it will be true. But I mean by that, not that there will be a new truth in this thing. If you push yourself to go beyond what you know and give birth to something that you're prepared to let it grow and grow the way it needs to grow, not control it, and then there is the potential, if you grow it in the right way, for it to have real value to a whole load of people.
Yeah, like it might be it might be fame and fortune, but if at the very least, I think like if what we're building lands for people, then it will be recognized, if that makes sense, because as like you have made something of use, and we are using it as a community. Like that's.
And in this reading, what I would say is the dynamic that's coming out right from the beginning has been like playing with the levers with what's useful and valuable to people, and what decisions should we make. And I think the success here, the definition of success, will be keeping an eye on that truth, which is it valuable to other people, and not to get too lost in your own ideas of what works or what doesn't, or control and dominating it rather than letting it grow in its own way. So if you are here struggling, like what's right, this is saying lean into the user, the listener, the people, and keep an eye on that, but also allow this thing to go in directions that you can't necessarily predict, or you can't, that your ego or your experience or your gnosis to date has perhaps ignored or lost or not seen some other truth that is out there. And so leaving that openness to its own growth, it will be its own thing. And to apply that maternal nurturing and developing and growth, rather than competing with it. I think that's the other thing. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, don't become its own competitor. Let it grow. Anyways.
William, honestly, that is all amazing advice. I think, regardless of where it came from, I'll repeat that statement again. I guess I said that earlier, but yeah, wow, that is so relevant. And I don't know if I'm speaking for you, Jason, but it feels like something that we can apply, and it is matching up exactly with much of our thought.
Yeah,
and look, I don't say this to everyone I do readings with, but half of this is you toss a coin, heads one thing, tails the other. Sometimes it is self-reinforcing. Sometimes you don't know the answer to that question. And it's only when you see a thing and you go, oh, I didn't want that, I wanted the other one. You sort of knew the answer, but sometimes you can't quite access it. And so I think I use the cards very much as a tool for that, tapping that intuitive sense rather than the reason and rational that we all get so wrapped up in the material or the psychological, like feeling your way through these things and actually using the cards as a way to perhaps get out of the rational thinking or even the psychological thinking and start to think about these resonances and how they might, and just look at the problem from that perspective. Like, what does giving birth to a new thing actually mean? What will people praise? What will people, and how can that direct your thinking? So again, this is where there's such fundamental and foundational energies and ideas that sometimes just to look at the thing from that perspective. I do believe they were sorted into a group and described as being important because, like, this wasn't just Valentina's. He was pulling from thousands of years of study and knowledge to land on some of these things that are important and useful to people.
If you could tell people where they can find you online, where they can buy the cards, where they can read 2026's Aeon card reading, obviously all this stuff will be down in the notes below, but it's good to go through because we want people to buy these cards. We want people to know what 2026 is going to hold. So please give us the plugs.
So the best way to just follow along is I have a Substack called Aeonology Chronicles. It has chronicled for the last 5 years my exploration. In the last year, I've got much more rigorous of doing a weekly post. And in the notes, what I do is every so often, every couple of days, I will do an individual card because, again, I think part of this is about helping people think about each of the cards and the meaning. And again, if they want to apply that to their day, that's fine. But really, I'm just sort of like, okay, this is the card of the day, and this is the thing that is useful and good to think about. And then the main posts are really more thoughtful, like the nature of reality, unconsciousness, and just my investigation. I was just talking about this, like I did a dinner for the Seven Fishes with some friends, which is why I was late with the Substack. But just starting to look at the Aeonology as it relates to Christianity, how it, and the importance of fishes from various religions, and some of the symbolism around fishes and how it related to some of the different cards and sort of readings. So that's where you'll get the Substack. The book is available at knockwoodcards.com. Book cards. There is my old deck of cards there as well, which are the Knockwood cards. This is the Aeon deck. I think it's clear that they're separate, but different people buy different cards. That's it, really. And then if you're ever in New Paltz, there's a couple of stores in New Paltz that carry the book and the cards, and occasionally I'm sitting there doing reading.
Amazing. And our plugs are help us keep the show going by donating at patreon.com/Gnostic or paypal.me/Gnostic for one-time donations.
The one thing I also wanted to just sign off with is that what I love about this conversation, but also about this project, is that, like, I think it's even apparent right on the very cover of the book, the book that I'm looking at, where there's like sort of a triangle shape, a circle shape, and then a dome or half circle shape, is that what so much of this is about is how do these ideas, how do these experiences, how do these concepts intersect, integrate, connect, interrelate with each other. And I think this is it's come up a lot of this conversation, but that it's so easy for the subject of Gnosticism to become purely conceptual or purely like it either feels purely academic, or the other version of it is that it's so dogmatically spiritual that it's like it feels like you're reading a D&D monster list of like who can beat up who, but it never will. That has no integration into our day to day. Whereas what I love about this is that there's no way you can't involve yourself in this process. This is the integration of so many things. And so I'm just very thankful for that.
In my writings and stuff, I talk about this a lot. It's sort of the dynamic nature of the Aeons in that they are relational. They relate to each other and they relate to what's going on in the world and within you. And that, for me, I feel like our society and our lives are so dumbed down to the lowest common denominator and simplicity. Mm-hmm. And what I love is these cards are incredibly complex. There's layers of light and dark. If you want to get into them, you really can. But that's intentional because I actually think the reason they become valuable is because they recognize the complexity. They recognize the difficulty. The Aeons themselves recognize the complexity of the world, and they are relational to each other. And so they're not static. They're not absolute. They are relational and contextual. And that's why they're so helpful, because they are part of the complexity, and we're all trying to navigate our way around all the reality that is complex, intricate, layered. And so rather than just being a simple thing, oh, this means this, I've purposely designed it as the dynamics and the relationships between inner and outer, social and personal.
Yes.
Physical and spiritual. Like, it's designed to accommodate uncertainty in that aspect.
I think that's
a good thing.
I think it's a necessary thing. That's why I wanted to close out the show with that bit of praise, is that I think it's so necessary to see these as relational, to see them as not either historical abstract things or singular, specific, individualized cosmic entities that only work one way, if that makes sense.
I had someone ask me if Aeons were angels, which I sort of thought was an interesting question.
Hmm.
I think there's a real tendency to personify these things, and I think tarot cards often personify. And I've worked really hard to try and make sure that these are actually more symbolic and interpretative, rather than representing a particular person or a particular thing or a particular. Like, that's why those symbols that you pick on have meaning, but they interrelate with each other. I have to say, and my creative partner Graham Wood, who is in England doing readings for people in Margate, Graham designed these, and again, totally understood this aspect of the relationship and the sort of representation and symbolism. He's an incredible designer who's done amazing work from, like, back in the day. He was one of the co-founders of a design collective called Tomato, who did like the titles of Train Spotting and The World. The band came out of there, and he's done record labels for the Thompson Twins, and he's done some of the biggest brands in the world. He's also really into Gnostic Aeonology, and was my partner in creating them.
That's fantastic. Yeah, no, and it's they're beautiful, beautiful cards. And for those listening on the podcast, we'll make sure there's an image of the of these cards as well available on our website.
Yeah, absolutely. We can include a shot of the reading with the podcast, so people can get that visual aspect of it if they choose to engage with the show in that way. Well, I guess it's time for real, though I am sad, and I am glad that you followed up with those points, Jason. So, William, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody at home, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great 2026, William. Have a great 2026, listeners. Though, looking at the news and the way things have been going, we'll find out from William's reading. What to expect. Bye, everybody.
You will.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.